I never wanted my father's fortune. All I wanted was the truth. And maybe a little peace, something I hadn't known since he married that woman. The woman I still refuse to call my stepmother, because stepmother is still a title. She didn't deserve any title, not affection, not forgiveness. My name is Helena Costa. I am 34 years old, and this is the story of how I inherited everything from my father. But more importantly, it is the story of how I discovered what they did to him when he needed me most, when he was vulnerable, when he could no longer defend himself. My first memory of Lara, yes, that's her name, is the sound of high heels echoing across the marble floor of my father's house, as if she already knew that one day it would all be hers. She smiled too much. She touched things as if they already belonged to her. And she looked at me as if I were a nuisance, an unexpected variable in her equation. My father, Roberto Costa, was a brilliant businessman. He founded one of the largest chains of eye clinics in the country. He started with a single rented room in Sorocaba, in the interior of São Paulo, and in less than 20 years, he turned it into an empire. He was respected, meticulous, and needy. He lost my mother very early on, and when he met Lara, his eyes were already clouded, not by cataracts but by loneliness. She came into his life as an informal caregiver. Yes, she said she was a nurse, but she never showed a diploma. And you know what's even sadder? He never asked. I was 26 when she showed up. I was already living away from home, building my career as a therapist in Campinas, and only visited my father on weekends. The changes happened gradually, like poison dripping in homeopathic doses. First, she started redecorating the rooms. Then she fired the gardener who had been there for years. Next, the cook. After that, my father stopped answering my calls. He started forgetting appointments, talking in a disjointed manner. And I started to wonder if he was okay. That's when I got the first call from a lawyer. He wanted to confirm a document, a change in the will. I froze. Excuse me, change in what sense? Your father is transferring 40% of the company to his wife. The word fell like lead in my throat. I didn't know they were married. No one knew. Not my aunt, not my cousins, not his business partners. Something inside me ignited, or burned. I couldn't tell. But I swore to myself that I would find out what was going on. And I swore more. That if she had done something to him, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who cried when I graduated, who recorded every one of my piano recitals, she would pay. With everything she had. But what I didn't know yet was that the truth I was about to discover would turn my world upside down. And that was just the beginning. I remember exactly the day I realized my father was no longer the same. It was a Friday in September. I showed up at his house unannounced, bringing his favorite dish, eggplant lasagna with Parmesan cheese. I knew he loved it, and I was worried. For weeks, we had only spoken in short, controlled messages. I'm fine, honey. Lara is taking care of me. Don't worry. But that was exactly what worried me. The automatic, almost rehearsed tone. The door was answered by a nurse I had never seen before. Young, thin, with an insecure look. Hi, I'm Roberto's daughter, I said. Oh, yes. He can't have visitors right now. He's resting on doctor's orders. That sounded like a ready-made excuse to me. I forced my way in, politely but firmly. I walked past him and went straight to the room. And there, my world began to crumble. My father was lying there, staring blankly at the ceiling. Thin, fragile, unshaven. The room was stuffy. There was a pile of medications next to the bed, bottles I had never seen before. It took him a few seconds to recognize me. Helena, he said, his voice slurred. What a nice surprise. I sat next to him for almost 2 hours. He oscillated between moments of lucidity and strange lapses. He said he had fallen a few times, that Lara was taking care of everything, that he was resting for a new phase. It sounded strange to me. But it was when I said goodbye, already outside, heading for the car, that it happened. Lara appeared at the door wearing a red silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand, and a smile so forced that it turned my stomach. Oh, Helena, I hope you won't be showing up unannounced like this. Your father needs peace and quiet. He's on too much medication. He's confused. What's going on, Lara? He's old. And you, honestly, should trust me more. After all, he chose me. Those words were spoken like a knife stabbed between my ribs. She knew what she was doing. It was a message, a declaration of territory. But the worst was yet to come. 2 days later, I received an email from my father's company's legal department. It informed me of an extraordinary meeting with the new members of the board of directors. Lara was among them. Yes, she now had a seat on the board of the clinic chain. The woman who, months earlier, had served tea and worn a borrowed lab coat to look like a nurse, now had decision-making power over the company my father had spent his entire life building. At the meeting, she showed up in a white suit, her hair perfectly styled, carrying a briefcase. She spoke in a calm but firm tone, as if she had rehearsed every comma. She looked at me, sitting at the end of the table, and said, "We are here to discuss the future of Costa Medical, and with all due respect, I believe the time has come to modernize our management. We need to leave the past behind." The past, for her, was my father. It was me. It was more than humiliation. It was a blow, not just against me, but against the living memory of everything that man had built. I saw longtime partners applauding. I saw investors smiling. And me? I left there with my eyes burning. But I didn't let a single tear fall. Not that day. That was when I swore, once again, that she would not get away with it. But to do that, I would have to prepare myself and become someone she would never see coming. The truth is that no one prepares to be disinherited while still alive. Even though I was still legally an heir, emotionally, I was already being treated like a piece off the board. The week after that disgusting meeting, the rumors started. People who used to greet me at company parties now looked away. Business partners addressed Lara, ignoring my presence. And worst of all, my father remained isolated, as if living in a bubble she had built herself, with bricks of manipulation and concrete of medication. I went back to his house 3 times, and every time I was barred from entering. On one occasion, I heard him shouting my name, trembling behind the door. But the nurses pretended not to hear. One of them, a new one with a southern accent, didn't even know my father had a daughter. At the rehabilitation clinic where he used to do physical therapy, I was informed that his treatment had been suspended by order of his legal guardian. She had signed everything. She had changed his contact information, his medical guardians, his bank access. My father was becoming a puppet, and I was a spectator of the worst show of my life. It was during this period that my mental health began to crumble. I stopped seeing my own patients. I canceled sessions. I cried, locked in the bathroom. I felt ashamed, humiliated, lost. The emptiness that my father's absence created in me was like an endless echo. He was still alive, but it was as if they had erased his soul, and I watched it happen without being able to reach out. I started receiving messages from acquaintances saying that I needed to accept that Lara was doing what was best for him. Some, with passive cruelty, said that it was natural for him to choose someone to really take care of him. As if I were an absent, ungrateful, distant daughter. It tore me apart. I started having insomnia, anxiety attacks. I was diagnosed with panic syndrome. I distanced myself from everything. Friends, colleagues, family. I felt completely alone. And the worst part? Lara knew, and she fed off it. She started posting photos with my father on social media, always smiling, with sweet and false captions. Today, he smiled with his heart. Nothing makes me happier than taking care of him. I wanted to scream, to show the world that it was all an act, that behind that image was a woman who kept him sedated, who drove away everyone who loved him, who had taken control of every penny he had like a silent and lethal parasite. But the world doesn't hear those screaming from inside a well. That was when something inside me broke. And then, it rebuilt itself. I began to understand that if I wanted to save him and get justice, I could no longer act like a daughter. I would have to act like an adversary, and an adversary that no one suspects is the most lethal of all. So I started studying. I investigated my father's medical history. I used old contacts to access records, certificates, prescriptions. I tracked down the lawyers who had drafted the change to his will. I discovered that many documents had been signed at times when he could barely speak. There were loopholes, flaws, contradictions. The game was far from over. And Lara, she was about to find out who I really was. It was during a sleepless night, alone in the kitchen of my apartment with a cup of cold coffee in my hands, that I understood. I didn't need to shout. I needed to dig. With precision. With patience. Like someone preparing for delicate surgery. Lara was smart. I had no doubt about that. But she was also arrogant. And every arrogant person believes they will never be found out. She was so sure of her position that she had left clues, small, subtle ones. But they were there. I started by hiring a private investigator, Rodrigo Valenza, former civil police officer, specialist in property fraud and family manipulation. When I heard how he described silent scams perpetrated by opportunistic spouses, my blood ran cold. It was as if he were describing exactly what was happening to my father. "You're just in time," he told me. "But we don't have much time. If she consolidates the transactions, you'll have to fight in court for years. And honestly, with him still alive and mentally incapacitated, your margin is minimal." We began an in-depth investigation. Rodrigo combed through contracts, bank transfer records, dates of will changes, and movements within the company. We discovered that Lara had not only become a majority shareholder with the support of bribed advisors, but that she was also using shell companies in her brother's name, a man with a history of fraud, to divert funds from Costa Medical to accounts in tax havens. Meanwhile, I resumed my discreet visits to my father's house, now with the support of a former nurse who had been fired by Lara months earlier and who offered to help me. It was this nurse, Cynthia, who showed me something I will never forget. "Helena, your father is not sick like she says. He is being drugged." She opened a locked box at the back of the medicine cabinet. Inside were unlabeled bottles, others with fake names, and prescriptions signed by a doctor who, when contacted by Rodrigo, swore he had never prescribed them. It was clear. Lara was administering substances that reduced my father's cognitive abilities. She wanted to keep him in a state of apathy so she could continue to control everything, but the plan went further. A document filed at a psychiatric clinic indicated that Lara had requested a permanent legal incapacity assessment for him. She wanted to have him declared incompetent. And I had to act before that happened. That's when I decided to use the weapons I knew best: my mind, silence, and strategy. I created a new digital identity under the pseudonym Eva Denise and contacted the company's main partners pretending to be an interested investor. I wanted to understand who was willing to betray my father for convenience, and who still remembered who he was. To my surprise, some were not bought. They were just intimidated, manipulated. I needed them. I put together a dossier with photographic evidence, audio recordings, falsified accounting reports, and even screenshots of emails sent by Lara to a financial advisor in which she said, "As soon as he is officially declared incapacitated, the company will be ours for good." Wow. She didn't say mine. This was bigger than I had imagined. But now I was no longer in mourning. I was no longer the desperate daughter begging for attention. I was a strategist. And Lara, she had no idea that I was already inside her fortress. The next phase would require coldness, surgical precision, and a heart of stone, because justice was on its way. But first, she would taste fear. Have you ever seen a spider slowly dismantling another spider's web? Without making a sound, just cutting, thread by thread, until everything collapses. That's exactly what I started doing with Lara. My first step was to strike where she least expected it: the trust of Costa Medical's partners. I approached Paulo Quintana, the only remaining member of the original board who still had some respect for my father's legacy. Paulo had been removed from decision-making by Lara, but he still held symbolic power and valuable contacts. "Paulo, listen to me calmly. I have proof that Lara is defrauding the company, and I want you to help me save it, not just for my father, but for both of you." He hesitated. A lot. But when he saw the forged reports, the captured audio recordings, and especially the fake medical prescription, he simply turned pale. "My God. She's murdering your father in slow motion." Using Paulo, we managed to discreetly call an extraordinary meeting, hidden from the rest of the board, with some longtime investors who were unhappy with the low profits and recent management decisions. At that meeting, I, still using the pseudonym Eva Denise, presented a devastating, but true, financial overview of the embezzlement carried out by Lara. The rumors began. 2 weeks later, Lara received an unfriendly visit from a group of shareholders demanding explanations about the transfers to a company called HL Holdings, her brother's front company. She denied it. She smiled. She feigned surprise. But there, the first crack appeared. And cracks turn into fissures. Meanwhile, Rodrigo and I were advancing on another front, infiltrating a new nurse into my father's home. We used a trusted professional, Mariana, who introduced herself as a replacement for the previous nurse, claiming a family health problem. Lara, overly confident, accepted, as long as she was cheap and discreet. Mariana recorded everything: hidden cameras in brooches, microphones in the baseboards of the bedroom, sensors on bottles. In less than a week, we had images of Lara switching medication labels, pressuring my father to sign papers, and even mocking him. "Poor thing, he doesn't even know he's lost everything," she said. "He thinks he's still in charge." I watched with my stomach churning. Hatred consumed me, but I took a deep breath. It wasn't time to explode yet. Each new day was a calculated move. I got a forensic expert to review the psychiatric report she had commissioned. We found gross inconsistencies. The doctor's signature had been scanned from another document. With that, we filed a request for a preliminary injunction to prevent my father's permanent incapacitation. But the real blow was yet to come. Remember HL Holdings? We discovered that on behalf of this company, Lara had purchased a $1 million property in the countryside, registered in her brother's name. But she forgot one simple thing. The IP number used to sign the contracts was the same one she used at my father's house. An amateur mistake, but a fatal one. Now we had corruption, financial fraud, misrepresentation, and abuse of a vulnerable person. All documented. And yet, I wanted more. I wanted her to feel it. And I started with her ego. Using a fake LinkedIn profile, I posted an anonymous complaint about an influential figure in a network of clinics who had manipulated an elderly businessman to take control of his assets. The post went viral in the medical sector. Several people began to speculate, but without naming names. Lara went crazy. She called emergency meetings. She had the post taken down. She ordered an investigation, but she couldn't prove anything. She was losing it. Her demeanor began to change. The confidence that had once characterized her posture and voice was now unstable. She began responding to emails aggressively, missing meetings, and even yelled at a client in the lobby of the main clinic. People began to notice. And I just watched, like someone watching a castle collapse brick by brick. But the real collapse, that was yet to come. And when it did, there would be nowhere left to hide. When you take away the foundations of someone like Lara, she wobbles, but still believes she can regain her balance. But when you take away control, ego, and reputation all at once, she collapses. That's exactly what happened. She started to lose control. It all started with a leaked email, a copy of a conversation between Lara and her brother, where she said, "If the old man dies soon, it'll be better for us." This message accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, found its way into the hands of 2 members of Costa Medical's board of directors. One of them was so shaken that he asked to be suspended indefinitely. The news spread, and what was once just a suspicion of wrongdoing turned into an internal scandal. Lara tried to contain it. She called a general meeting with all the executives. She took the stage at the headquarters, wearing her impeccable beige pantsuit and rehearsed speech. "They're trying to sabotage me," she said. "There are outside forces with ulterior motives trying to destroy Roberto's legacy. And I won't allow it." Some applauded, but others looked at each other suspiciously, because the smell of rot was already in the air, and her mask was slowly slipping. Behind the scenes, things got even worse. Rodrigo managed to contact 2 former employees who had been threatened by Lara when they questioned suspicious movements of funds from the clinic. We recorded their statements. We added them to the manipulated reports, the recordings from the house, the altered receipts, and the international transfers. We put together a dossier, the most complete one anyone could imagine. And then we did something simple. We delivered this dossier, with a certified copy, to the city prosecutor's office. But we didn't stop there. The next morning, Lara was surprised by a preventive court order freezing the accounts of HL Holdings and her personal accounts. The warrant included a search and seizure of documents at the house where she lived with my father. According to reports from Nurse Mariana, who was still undercover, Lara panicked. She threw her cell phone against the wall. She cried. She vomited. And she screamed a phrase that echoed throughout the house. "It was her, that bitch, his daughter. She did this to me." Finally, she had figured it out. She knew I was behind it, but it was too late. That same day, I filed a court order for temporary guardianship of my father based on all the evidence we had gathered. In less than 48 hours, we got an emergency hearing. In the courtroom, I saw Lara for the first time in weeks. She was unrecognizable. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands. The woman who once seemed like a fortress was now a shadow of her former self. She tried to argue. She cried. She lied. But the judge read aloud parts of the dossier, images, testimonies, reports, and then he looked directly at her and said, "You are under investigation for crimes against a vulnerable person, ideological falsehood, and possible attempted murder. You are legally prohibited from approaching Mr. Roberto Costa or any property belonging to him." She didn't respond. She just sank into her chair. I left without looking back. The next day, I went to my father's house with a bailiff. I entered through the front door, as I should have done from the start. Mariana greeted me with a silent hug, and in the bedroom, there he was, my father. His eyes were no longer so cloudy. His face was tired, but alive. When he saw me, he smiled. A small but sincere smile. "Daughter, is that really you?" I held his hand and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Security. He was still there. And now, he was free. But my mission wasn't over. Because justice, true justice, was yet to come. They say revenge should never be personal. But those who say that have never seen their own father poisoned with legal disguises while smiling helplessly. And no, what I did wasn't revenge. It was justice. But I made sure to deliver it with style. With Lara legally removed from any assets or power related to my father, the prosecution finally opened the criminal case. The charges piled up: ideological falsehood, abuse of vulnerability, fraud, criminal association, attempted fraudulent interdiction, and more, much more. But it was the press that made Lara's downfall complete. The cover story of Valor Real magazine featured a photo of her entering the courthouse wearing sunglasses and looking devastated. Caregiving angel, or parasite of the estate? The rise and fall of Lara Alencar, the woman who deceived an empire. The reports had everything: the audio recordings, the videos, the manipulated reports, the offshore account in Panama, her brother with a criminal record, the doctor who swore he never signed the prescriptions, and above all, the records of my father's manipulation. Costa Medical was at the center of the storm. The press camped out in front of the headquarters. Executives were forced to give interviews. The partners who had supported Lara began to deny any involvement. One by one, they fell. Lara disappeared for days, until a video leaked by a former employee showed her in a luxury restaurant in the interior of São Paulo, yelling at the waiter because they didn't want to serve her favorite water. Within hours, the video went viral with the caption, "Manipulative, fraudulent, and snobbish." The court of public opinion was faster than the legal system. The image she had built over the years, of a dedicated woman, a loving wife, a competent businesswoman, disintegrated like wet paper. And me? I was still far from the spotlight, because it wasn't about me. It was about him, about the man who raised me. But something changed in me. I felt that I was no longer that devastated daughter from months ago. I was someone else, stronger, colder, more whole. And the moment came that, as much as I had imagined it, took me by surprise. The phone rang. It was the public prosecutor's office. "Helena Costa?" "Yes. You have been appointed as your father's interim legal guardian, and there is a clause in the old will, prior to the illegal changes, that names you as the sole heir. We believe you should have access to this now." I stopped. My heart raced. "Excuse me, sole heir?" "Yes, ma'am. All assets, shares, properties, and investments. Everything will be yours. The new judge has approved the annulment of the fraudulent will." It took me a while to understand, to absorb, to accept. It was mine, everything. What Lara tried so hard to steal, what she manipulated, sedated, and destroyed to get. It was, legitimately, back in the hands it was always meant to be in. But I didn't smile. The truth is, I didn't feel proud, nor joy, nor celebration. I felt a cold calm, silent, and powerful. because what filled me was not fortune. It was the certainty that she had felt every grain of the fall. And justice finally had a name. Mine. Justice is a process, but ruin is a spectacle. Lara's public hearing was scheduled for a cloudy Wednesday. The Sorocaba courthouse looked like a movie set that day. TV crews, photographers, protesters, even onlookers with cell phones in hand crowded the door. It was no longer just a court case. It was a symbol. The case of the stepmother who tried to erase her own daughter's father had become a national soap opera. When Lara entered through the side door, accompanied by 2 lawyers and a security guard, the crowd booed. She was unrecognizable, pale, thin, dressed in a simple blouse, dark pants, and flat shoes. Her hair was tied back carelessly. For the first time, the woman who had always used her appearance as armor was stripped of all symbols. During the trial, the judge did not mince words. He listed the evidence, he read the reports, he played the audio recordings. Lara kept her head down almost the entire time, but at one point she looked up, and our eyes met. There was no hatred in them, no remorse, just a kind of resigned despair, like someone who already understands that they have lost, but still hopes for a miracle that will not come. The prosecution sought her conviction for abuse of a vulnerable person, falsification of medical documents, property fraud, coercion of witnesses, misappropriation of property of an incapacitated person. In addition to a supplementary request for full compensation to my father's estate and a criminal fine, the defense tried to argue emotional instability, pressure, excessive love. But no one there believed in narratives anymore. Reality had already spoken too loudly. Lara was sentenced to 16 years in prison. At the end of the hearing, as she was being led away by 2 prison guards, she turned to me and whispered, "You destroyed my life." I didn't answer. I just stared at her in silence, because she needed to understand, in that moment, that what destroyed her life was herself. After that day, everything moved quickly. Lara's name was officially removed from Costa Medical's corporate structure. HL Holdings was dissolved. Her brother was arrested in Campinas a few days later, trying to board a flight to Uruguay with cash. And my father began to reappear. With the help of a new medical team, we were able to regulate his medication, adapt the house to his needs, and most importantly, gradually restore his autonomy. On a sunny Sunday morning, he asked to walk out onto the balcony. We stood there, side by side, without saying anything for several minutes. Then he said, "She erased pieces of my memory, daughter, but you gave me back who I am." I swallowed hard. There, at that moment, I realized that even after justice, even after Lara's downfall, even after the fortune, there was something that victory couldn't bring back. The lost time. The months he spent alone. What I lived through in silence. The pain remains, and I had to learn to live with it. People greeted me on the street. They called me a warrior, a heroine, but I didn't feel any of that. I only did what any daughter would do for someone she loved unconditionally. Even when everyone around me preferred to believe well-crafted lies, I insisted on the truth. And the truth, as painful as it was, set me free. But the hardest part was about to begin, learning to live after the war. There is a kind of silence that only comes after the storm. It is not the silence of loneliness. It is the silence of reconstruction. My father's house underwent renovations. Not just physical ones, but emotional ones as well. Walls that were once cold were once again filled with light. Old paintings were hung back up. And for the first time in years, the balcony had real flowers. Not the artificial ones Lara left there just to look caring. He still bears scars, some memory lapses, a slight tremor in his hands. But he also carries something I thought I would never see in him again, a sparkle in his eyes. Roberto Costa is far from the man he once was, but he is alive. And above all, he is free. As for me, well, it took me months to start seeing patients again, to be able to walk into my office without feeling a crushing weight on my chest. But I came back, and today I listen to stories of abuse, of silence, of pain, with a new perspective, because now I know firsthand what it's like to be discredited, what it's like to fight against a truth that everyone prefers to ignore. Yes, I inherited a fortune, a company, a name, But none of that was the most valuable thing I gained. What I truly inherited was courage. The courage to face a woman who seemed indestructible. The courage to return to the house where I was humiliated and turn it into a home again. The courage to rebuild myself after losing almost everything. And above all, the courage to move on without needing revenge as fuel. Because true justice is silent. It doesn't need applause or trophies. Just time. Today, I live a few minutes away from my father's house. We always meet on Thursdays to have coffee and talk about trivial things. The neighbor's dog, the new flower in the garden, the bad food at the hospital. Things that seem small, but mean the world. The other day, he said to me, "You didn't just save me from Lara, daughter. You saved me from letting myself fall, from forgetting who I was." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I cried. But not out of sadness. It was a clean cry of peace. And maybe that's the real happy ending. Not because everything worked out, but because even when everything went wrong, I didn't give up. If I could go back in time, I might not change a thing. Because it was in the midst of darkness that I discovered the woman I am. Not just my father's heir, but the author of my own story. And that no one will ever try to rewrite.